I'm sitting here with the ShivWorks crew, and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves a little bit. I hope to kind of give, for those people that are listening that don't know you guys, they're going to after this. And so I want to provide a little context to what we're talking about. But we're at the Combative Summit 2024. We're here in Iberville, Mississippi. This is Craig Douglas's hometown.
It is.
This is like your backyard.
Literally.
You've trained here at American Top Team here. We had Mikey on the other night. We talked to him a little bit. It's been an outstanding host. I got to see and experience a bit of what you guys do, and I want to talk about that today. Give some people some insights to who you guys are and what you're doing. I have lots of questions. We've talked offline. I made Scott stop talking to me. I'm like, no, we got to save this, man. I don't want to hear anymore. So this has been one of those things that I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm going to try not to fanboy on you guys. All right. And at the same time, what I like, and just kind of setting this up, this is going to be maybe a little bit different for people than they may be expecting. And I mean that because I think it's going to be a little bit more intellectual. And I don't want to disappoint anybody by preloading that and then have Brian say something really dumb since he's from California like me.
That's true. Yeah.
But at the same time, like most people, probably want to talk about fighting, all the time, or want to hear like, well, what's Craig's take on this specific situation or whatever. This is going to go a few different ways, and I'm all about it. So we can go down a ton of rabbit holes, and we can I'll steer it back if we need to do that. Right on. But let's just let it go where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't we start with you, big guy? You're sitting in the seat of honor. Let's do it.
So I am Craig Douglas. I retired from this area in law enforcement in the year 2011, after a 21-year law enforcement career. Most of that time was spent as a dope cop, a SWAT cop, or both simultaneously. While I was on the job, I started teaching in open enrollment, as we call it. So not law enforcement, not military, but open enrollment settings. And I premiered some coursework that I call extreme close quarter concepts, which we define as an overview of functional handgun skills at 0 to 5 feet. And we further caveat that with that requires an interdisciplinary approach to examining that problem. So essentially what we do is we teach adaptations with the pistol to take into account grappling range, adaptations to grappling to take into account pistols and knives, and we look at the intersection of those two, and then we pressure test with realistic contact and equipment like marking cartridges and rubber knives and MMA gloves and things like that, and pressure test the content as hard as we safely can, understanding that everything is a simulation and it's not a real fight, but it's a fairly honest experience. And the course by design now is both a course of instruction and an experience. So that's me.
We're going to come back to you because we're going to talk a little bit about how we got here or how you got here. But I'm going to turn it over to Scott real quick and just kind of get a little bit of a background, introduce yourself, give us the rundown. I heard a little bit of it yesterday, when you guys delivered the material that you're delivering, but why don't you share it with the people that didn't get to hear it?
Right on. Scott Oates, former SEAL, got out 90s era SEAL, so got out in 2001 prior to 9/11, but lifelong martial artist, been doing jiu-jitsu primarily, and been doing jiu-jitsu probably about 25 years. I was doing it before, most people were doing it. So, getting a blue belt in the late 90s was, like the one-eyed man in the sea of the blind.
Very, right? Very obscure thing.
It was awesome.
Right?
It was awesome. It was like being
cool.
Yeah, exactly. It was like being Superman. Anyway, but so I was teaching and training and doing a lot of different things over the years, and most of them were, as we were speaking before, most of those things were all, art related or art specific, i.e. we taught people jiu-jitsu, we taught people wrestling, we taught people striking, that kind of thing. And so, over the years, that was better than nothing. But about 2016 or 17, I found Creg, went to ECQC, and went through the course myself. And at the end of the course, I said, he's figured it out, right? And everything that I was teaching up to that point, which was fine, but I couldn't in good conscience continue teaching the same type of stuff, knowing that there was a better way.
What you know now.
Yeah, exactly. And so I asked Creg, I said, Creg, what do I do, man? What do I do? Because I want to teach some of this content. And he's just like, hey, man, just give me credit. Just tell people where you learned it and how you came to where you are and go with that. And so I did that for a little while, but then at some point I said, it's easier to hitch my wagon to Creg, and so he's got the wheel, and so I figured let's get together and make it a better wheel, and that's kind of the way it's gone for a while. I think Brian came on. When did you come on? 22, 20, yeah, and then from there it's just even skyrocketed. Like we're talking about the think tank over here. Mm-hmm. It's just more and more and more, and things get better and better and better, and we're constantly, pressure testing it within ourselves as well as, what we teach out there. So it's been super cool, super and impactful on my life as well for a lot of other reasons other than just I like to teach. Mm-hmm. But it's been, one of those things that kind of ShivWorks is not just a course of instruction. It's an experiential thing that you take people through an experience.
Well, you experienced it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Everybody gets tested in ECQC, in the Thunderdome.
Right? I love that. There's a few key points I'm going to circle back on that to talk a little bit about. I'm just going to ask Brian, fill us in, man. What can you tell us about yourself?
Brian Frias. I grew up in the Bay Area, and my family still lives out in the Bay. I try to avoid going there at all costs. I went in to the Marines in open contract. I wanted to blow stuff up. I took the ASVAB and did fairly well on it. So suddenly all the cool jobs that I really wanted to do disappeared, and they said, you can do these dumb jobs. So I went in open contract. I ended up getting drones. I didn't know what a drone was. So they showed me a commercial of a guy throwing something out, and I thought, well, I guess that's kind of cool. And then when I got there, it was an 18-foot wingspan, and I thought, that kind of looks heavy. I don't think I can carry that, guys. So went from there, still in the Marine Corps. Then I started doing the Marine Corps martial arts stuff. I went through their instructor program, got really into jiu-jitsu, and left active duty, moved to San Diego, where I didn't know a single person, just because that's where the mecca of jiu-jitsu was. Yeah,
jiu-jitsu is. Yep.
I stayed in the reserves for another 8 years, so 14 total. And then I was fortunate enough to get introduced to Andre Galvao, and I was at Oates headquarters for 3 years doing nothing but training. I went to school sort of once a week, but I trained all day, 6 days a week with all of them. And this was 2012, so the height of his ADCC career. I was there every day for every single camp, every Worlds camp, PANS camp,
wow.
Getting beat up and developing this jiu-jitsu skill, running out of GI Bill. So I needed a job, and the cops apparently only work 4 days a week. That sounded easy, not knowing anything about it. And I applied, got hired immediately after magically passing the polygraph, because they're really accurate. And as soon as I got into that, got into a pursuit, fought a dude, and was like, we can do this and not get in trouble. Yeah. So I was all in. I did the SWAT thing. I was there for 7.5 years, just under 8 years in San Diego, doing patrol, proactive policing, and SWAT. And I didn't do any UC stuff because I don't look like Creg. I definitely work for the government. And California went the way it did. San Diego got harsh. I could not work for a system that was doing what it was doing to people with the shutdowns and all of that. So I abandoned it, quit my job, moved to Florida, called up Creg, said, hey, can I follow you around for a month or so and see how it goes? And he fortunately gave me a shot. And the whole attraction to it was I went through ECQC in, I think, early 2018, late 2017.
Okay, so we're going back.
Yeah, and it was, my friend took me there. He said, you got to meet this guy. He does great stuff. I go out, and through the instructor programs in the Marine Corps, I had learned formal presentation of material. But Creg was the first time I saw someone provide formal presentation of technical physical skills, the merging of the two. And immediately I was like, that's how it's supposed to be done. That's how you get guys to retain stuff in short amount of time. And that has been my goal. How can I refine the presentation? How can I better pass this information to people in a short amount of time so it lasts? Not just, here's a bunch of good ideas, which is
A seminar.
what we did a few minutes ago.
Right.
Here's a collection of cool things I like. That's cool. That doesn't help anyone.
Right.
So that's where we are now. I live in Florida, travel with Creg full time. Every weekend we're going someplace new. Next weekend's Pennsylvania.
So, man, again, you guys, there's so many things that have come up in there. I think part of it is the experiences that I heard, both or all three of you, but specifically where Scott comes from and his background, and then obviously where you're coming from in your own background, Brian, and then Creg. I mean, you kind of glossed over it. I know you tell that story a lot of times, but the experiences that you guys have had have put you in a position, and this has kind of been the theme of several of the conversations that I've had with other guys here this week, that for me in a way are legends. But the thing that they always come back to is that they recognize what you were just saying there is we're passing on information and how important that is, particularly at this time, based on your 20, 30, I can't remember, Creg, how many years it's been since you started this, years of experience, and that this has been built on the shoulders of giants, so to speak. And along the way, like, what those giants provided has now been evolved, right? Going back to what Scott was saying there about all the things that he took from all the different people and how amazing all that stuff is, but still wasn't solving the problem.
Exactly.
And so let's talk about the problem solving and the presentation. I want to come back to that presentation piece because I think it's uber important. But Creg, maybe just talk about what you're doing at the summit, what you guys are doing at the summit this week, where do you guys fit in?
So our module for the summit, it's a kind of an amalgam of several pieces from ShivWorks coursework, but the theme is the title of the 2-hour block is weaponizing language for tactical outcomes. And
it's a lot of words, Creg.
It is a lot of words, big words.
We could find an acronym.
We could ask weaponizing.
People, the industry loves acronyms.
We're gonna find an acronym.
We'll have an acronym. Got to have one. But it's a look at basically what language does and how it diminishes motor activity and applies friction and makes it harder to do things, to make decisions, to move, whatever, and how vital that is in real world events. And going back to my experience, my lived experience, I had a 2-year undercover stint buying drugs. I was very active. I did this daily, nonstop for 2 years. And, if you're not, every time I was assaulted, there was language that preceded that assault. So if you're not just blindsided in the real world, you're not like a fighter in the cage where you're waiting, you're prepared, and Big John says, get it on.
Right.
There's almost always, unless it's a blindside hit, there's almost always language that precedes assault.
Gotcha.
And what we haven't done is we haven't really done a deep dive on the effect of that in decision making and motor activity and what you realistically can and can't do. And I learned this the hard way, buying drugs, trying to broker dope deals, and boom, it blew up in my face. So I wasn't prepared in the moment for the event. I was doing something else. I was aware of the possibility of an assault, okay, but still in all, you have to get up close and personal and interact with people when you buy drugs. So, I unfortunately learned the hard way. I was robbed 9 times in 2 years at gunpoint and lost some hearing in my left ear fighting over a gun and a car. Had my skull fractured and was almost beat to death and shot in the face by 2 guys on a 2-ounce powder cocaine deal. So those were 2 really seminal events that framed all of my formal education in martial arts, my lived experience up to that point. I've been in martial arts, have been in martial arts literally since I was in single digits. So I describe myself as Daniel LaRusso. I was the skinny kid with the birthmark getting beat up and bullied, whose grandfather took him to a martial arts school.
Said you're going to do this?
And said you're going to do this. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. And it was old school Taekwondo, and that's all there was back then. But it was like, we didn't even have, this is 1974. So they had just invented the Jun-Ri safety chop and kick. So I think that came like a year after I started martial arts. But we used to spar barehanded and stuff like that. For the time, that's all there was, right? And being in the South, we don't really have a collegiate or high school wrestling culture. That's usually not part of the Southern states. So that's what I did, and then came up through my teenage years, did Aikido, Aikijitsu, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, started doing Southeast Asian systems when I was on active duty in the Army, did Kali Salat, went through the whole Inosanto Lacosta catalog, and started Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on and off, more off than on in 1993 in seminar formats. And I always had an affinity and a good intuition for grappling. And I'd found in my law enforcement career, that's mostly what happens. Certainly, you control more people than balls-to-the-wall fights. So,
right.
the utility of grappling in my job, and the reality of grappling just kind of led me there. But yeah, I found that all of that formal training under the circumstances that I was operationally working undercover in, most of it just
didn't apply.
Didn't work. It didn't work. It failed me when I needed it the most. And those 2 years kind of created a room in my head that didn't exist before, and allowed me to sit by myself with these experiences and kind of just confront the fact that I wasn't trained properly. I'd invested a lot of time.
Did you know how to train?
No.
Okay, gotcha.
No. I mean, we thought we did. We thought we understood that. And then also as a police academy instructor, which I was for 22 years.
Oh, I missed that part.
So yeah, I was a police academy instructor. I had adjunct duties as a police academy instructor.
Gotcha.
So I've been formally teaching law enforcement and people in professions of arms and armed professions. They're two different things. For 32 years now. So learned a lot about how to do that properly just through doing it improperly and seeing the result. So all of that time and training and lived experience kind of put me in a place to discount and just get rid of everything that didn't have any utility. I think probably when you read, and I'm not going to make a connection between me and Bruce Lee other than it resonates with me when Bruce Lee got in an actual fight, didn't do well, and then completely shifted his programming over to more fitness-based stuff and things like that.
Yeah, the holy shit moment happened.
Exactly. So
I think you just compared yourself to Bruce Lee.
Did I compare?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
But that always resonated with me. So here's what happened. Basically, because I had these collateral duties as a police academy instructor, and I had access to Glock 17Ts, a lot of simunitions donated from the Navy, motorcycle helmets, aluminum trainers, and the MMA gloves of the Arrow. I took a few local, right on the cusp of 30-year-old police officers who were risk tolerant like me and interested in training. And we kind of created a local fight club and used all of that equipment well outside of the manufacturer's recommended guidelines for safety and good conduct. And certainly you could have a discussion about whether I should have done that. But what that gave me, that local fight club with T-guns, it gave me a laboratory to examine all of the, for the era of the 90s, all the best practices for extreme close range shooting. And what I found that corroborated my lived experience as an undercover officer was that all of that fell apart. All that fell apart.
Because it had never been tested.
It had never been tested. So the way we used to train, the training modalities for extreme close quarter shooting of the era were live fire, and that was typically done on a traditional police range with the turners that are set up for PPC competition. So you can't even touch the cardboard, right? So extreme close quarter shooting back then was a yard.
A yard, yep. 3 feet. Yep.
Well outside of wingspan. So guys did that, against a piece of cardboard. And the most resistance the cardboard ever gave was if a staple busted off of the stick and it flapped at you in a high wind. That's the most pressure-based, pressure tested. All those various shooting techniques were. And then the other ways guys trained was they took inert pistols with no protective gear because no one wanted to really hurt themselves, and they kind of half-assed around with blue guns without the accountability of those marking cartridges, and nobody institutionally nobody was doing contact distance work with simunitions because it says on the box, don't do that. Right.
Follow the rules, man.
So yeah, we did not follow the rules. We didn't. What not following the rules gave us, though, was a pretty clear lens of, okay, that actually doesn't work. That doesn't work. So there were a couple of years there where we had no idea what we were doing except just fighting.
Exploring stuff.
That's all we were doing. Mm-hmm. We didn't know what to do. And, back then when we started looking at how to do it, there were no best practices. There were no strategies, tactics, or techniques, or even any realistic training modalities. We were doing it. Right?
Everything else had been, is it fair to say it's institutionalized?
Everything else was just, extreme close quarter shooting has always been like a hip pocket class. It's never been the focus of instruction. It's, hey, just in case
it's an add-on.
Right. It's an addendum.
It's the blue gun that gets thrown onto the floor at a basic jiu-jitsu school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get after, let's see what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Blue gun and live fire, it's still who owns it. Yeah. So then you have that problem, right?
Yeah.
Is it a firearms problem? Is it a DTAC problem?
Right.
Self-defense problem?
But none of this is being accounted for when that blue gun hits the mat.
Not at all. Right. Not at all. Yeah, and like Brian said, the law enforcement training specifically is notoriously siloed and unidisciplinary, in that they got the DT guys over here and the firearms guys over here.
They don't talk to one another.
That shit does not cross. Cannot cross those streams.
No, can't cross the streams. So this what now we think of as our body of work, it didn't exist. There may have been some other people
doing it. Yeah.
There may be some other people like me doing it in fight clubs and garages and on ranges after hours when all the guys in red shirts leave, because they're fat and they don't want us on the range, right? But it wasn't happening institutionally. There was no body of work. So what's interesting was this time is also the early days of the UFC, right? Yep. And what's interesting about that, I think we all remember, anybody that watched the show back then, when that came on, it changed.
Mind-blowing.
It changed martial arts forever, right? It did. It because we saw broadcast into our own homes consistently and empirically what works and what doesn't, right? So, And it did. It turned the martial arts world on its head. And quite often, in referencing a younger generation, I say it saved at least one generation from suffering weird childhood kung fu, like most of us had to deal with, right? So
it's a real impact that you can observe. When Creg was a cop, everything that he thought worked failed him, and his stories all involve, I almost died. Every one of my stories where someone was trying to pull a gun on me, they were trying to take my gun, they had a knife in their hand, they had a gun in their hand, and I had to fight them. I had the answer already because it was already given to me. I saw it. I knew what worked. I didn't do the silly stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a real interesting way of looking at it.
Yep.
We didn't have the answers, and it almost killed us. Here's the way to do it. And some of us, fortunately, got the answers.
Yep.
Yeah. But still, professional schools, I still think pretty much no one does.
It's still siloed. Yeah, it's still siloed. Well, there's only one product in the market that, when you look at the MSDS, and we use that product, that allows you to shoot within wingspan. There's a marking cartridge that has a 1 foot versus a 3-foot standoff. So if you're using our techniques of a retracted gun and at a downward angle, you're in spec. Now we understand people, will screw guns into each other's buttholes and stuff like that.
Weird stuff
they do that
happens,
in ground fights all the time.
Got it.
But still in all, if you're using it the way you're supposed, that's how we sidestep around the inside of 3-foot rule with like the military. It's like, first of all, we're not using that product, we're using this product. Okay. And it says very clearly on the MSDS 1-foot standoff. And they're like, oh. But anyway, I thought that no holds barred model in the early days of the contest too, it was fairly primitive compared to what we see now. I mean, it looked like a weird tough contest.
Primitive. It was primitive.
You had guys showing up in wrestling singlets. I remember Ken Shamrock had on a boxing glove, a single glove in one fight. It looked like Dr. Han's Island in Enter the Dragon.
One guy's wearing a Speedo, one guy's wearing a gi.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Mortal Kombat, literally.
That was part of the show.
Yeah.
What are these guys coming? Who is this dude?
It was, So I thought
tunics.
I thought that so that kind of coincided with our local fight club and watching. Okay, this is watching that and experiencing that. We had some local guys who started fighting in, redneck Indian casino MMA.
Yeah, I went to several of those events when they first started.
That started happening.
Hometown.
That started happening locally. So within a couple of years of doing it, we kind of had a breakthrough on how to do this and why it worked the way it did. And when we found what we call our timing rule for in-fight weapons access, when we discovered, okay, that's how it works, what we realized very shortly after that, because a big break in a body of work that's significant, right? That takes a long time to actually see. Now, once you make a break, subsequent innovation happens a lot faster.
Pretty quickly,
right? Yeah.
Or as in comparison.
So what we saw was once we realized, okay, you have to control the limb of the adversaries closest to the gun before you initiate the presentation. That's how it works.
Don't let them get the gun up.
And what we realized was, grappling, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling are really good, consistent pathways to get to that end state that we had figured out organically, just beating the shit out of each other. Okay, so that's when it became that was really when I started going full face first into combat sports.
Got it.
Late 99, probably. Rich Clementi, who used to fight in the UFC, has a jiu-jitsu school over in Slidell, and he was a Div 1 wrestler. So Rich, the guy I was training with jiu-jitsu at the time, he used to do Rich's kids program, so we had some back and forth. So Rich would come over and do wrestling seminars. So I really started doing a deep dive on wrestling. And there were other guys, Paul Sharp and Mike Brown, who had wrestled in college and high school and were also police officers. I really started looking at wrestling and still wrestling as we think of it. Now that word can get conflated with modern hybrid no-gi grappling, and it's hard to make a distinction between wrestling and jiu-jitsu.
They are not the same.
But they're not the same. They're not the same. We don't think of them as the same. So, so that's when we started taking that approach. The first formal course was in 2003. So I've been on the road now, counting that year, 22 years. And we have taught in 48 states, 11 countries outside of the U.S., everybody in the military, most federal law enforcement agencies, the intelligence community. And we're on the road about 40 weeks a year. And it's now a fairly polished, consistent course and experience by design. But what continues to really, really evolve is the presentation. We made not the content, but the presentation consistently evolves. Because now that I have other people on board, I mean, for almost 2 decades, I was by myself.
Yeah, it's all you. Yep.
I was by myself. Just me, 150 pounds worth of gear, flying around, driving around, whatever else. There was nobody.
Craig Douglas Roadshow.
Yeah, it was me, right? Yep. Then Scotty came on board. Then I heard Brian. And now, since there's somebody to have a discussion with, I'm not talking to myself
It evolves.
driving back from class. The evolution in the presentation is significant, and also the other thing that's interesting about us is that when you're by yourself, you're in your own head all the time, right? Yep. Well, when you have something external, all of a sudden, everybody's forcing everyone else to ascend. Mm-hmm. So it even gets sharper and more precise. Yep. And now we're like, hey, we lost 9 minutes over an 11-hour day.
That's how tuned up it is.
That's unacceptable. Right, that's unacceptable.
Tuned up.
It is though.
But it is. And the only variable really is how many guys are in the class. Really, that's how it changes.
And all the things that make the course so much sharper now, the time management, the language, the way we create connection in individuals and the group, the safety aspects, all of that stuff makes it just a really, it's a potent experience. There are people who have said that, I think rightfully so, that ECQC is like the psilocybin of the training industry and that it does some pretty significant rewiring of your brain. And it does. I mean, we've had people who, based on their experience, have halved their body weight. I had a guy go from 420 to 210 and had another guy go from 360 to 180 based on the experience.
Because they woke up.
Of ECQC. Right. I've probably had 50 lose 100 pounds, and I have no idea how many people have lost 30 to 50 pounds. So it's potent, it's impactful. I mean, we're not life coaches, but there's a lot. It's interesting to me that there's a lot more going on with the experience, besides just the best strategies, tactics, and techniques for getting a gun out with somebody right on top of it.
Yeah, that was what I was saying earlier. I mean, it's...
For you mean?
For everyone. But
gotcha.
I didn't realize when I started, it was impactful for me, but being a lifelong martial artist, it wasn't as impactful as it is for other people. And when I was teaching, I wasn't thinking about that. Whatever I taught before ECQC and ShivWorks came into my knowledge base, it was not about anything other than just, I'm teaching this art and this is what I love and this is a great art and
this is how it's been taught.
It's a lifestyle. Right. Jiu-jitsu is a lifestyle, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, when you got into these situations that people went through and you start to see the visceral reaction that they're having from just having to, for females especially, but that was like, holy crap, we're really doing something different than just teaching people a bunch of techniques and ways, self-defense. We're teaching people self-defense in a system of being able to really take it to the next level for themselves, but then also self-realization, understanding that, holy crap, this is real, and I'm putting myself into a situation. I could have died right there. That was me dying, and I just saw myself get killed in a training situation, and luckily I experienced it here so that I can go out and do something so that shit doesn't happen in real life.
I was having this really good conversation last night with Matt Pranka and Jeff from Tentacle and John Valentine. We were sitting down, we were talking about this, but in a different context. And I think it was actually Jeff that posed the question to Matt. And that was it had to do more with mindset. And it got into kind of a self-talk kind of a conversation about self-talk and what's going on in your head and how Matt got to the level that he's at. And the first thing for him was the realization of what's actually possible. And until you see what's possible, you can't start having that conversation with yourself about how do I make that possible for me. But once you see it, that it's possible, then you know that that's a reality and you're faced with this conversation in your head now. So if I want to get better, I can either step back into the comfort zone of being good or at the level that I'm at right now, or I can realize what I just saw and then I can go chase that. So that's one way of doing it in terms of maybe advancing or progressing in a skill or in an art or something like that. But this is different. This is kind of looking at it from a different perspective. And this is what's possible for real with regard to me losing my life. Right. This isn't putting rounds on target or
people don't realize that until they're in it.
Right. So it's funny. I was talking with John a few minutes ago, and my oldest daughter reached out. She's 22. She was like, "Hey, how's it going down there? You guys having fun?" I'm like, yeah, this is amazing. It's probably I was telling John this morning, this might be one of the coolest things I've done. Awesome. And I've been to a lot of places and I've done a lot of things. This could be one of the coolest things I've done. So she's kind of asking me about it, and I'm sending her pictures. Right? Let me send you a couple videos, a couple pictures, a couple of those of you guys, and some of the stuff that I was watching happen in some of the other masters. That's part of the problem with this thing. If there's a problem, it's the FOMO that comes with missing anything that might happen in another room while you're here. Here. But the point of that is I sent her some shots, and this is guys with guns in their necks, right? Red guns in their necks, right? And other guys like, working some of the wrist control and stuff. Those guys down there in the octagon this morning with their shirts off and their jeans on, right? Dudes pushing one another on, sweating all over one another. She'd never seen anything like that before. Yeah. And she went, "What is that?" That's awesome. I go, "This is real life. That's what's happening here. Like, there's a bunch of fucking savages down here, sweetheart. Like, and this is what's on the street out there. And these are good humans."
I always take my shirt off if I'm going to get into a real fight.
No, there's a bunch of monsters here, right? Like, but and I don't know who they are, and I don't want you here, sweetheart, to see it. So I'll send you some pictures. You don't get to come here. Like, I don't want you anywhere near these guys. But the point being is this is a realization of what's out there. And to your point, like sitting in that car, right, or wherever it is in that field or on that mat in whatever situation, and you just watched what happened, that's a possibility. Not only is it a possibility, this happens all the time, right? This is the reality of it is, and then you're faced with I want to pretend I didn't see that, and I'll just go on doing what I'm doing, living my life the way I'm living it, or training the way I'm training, or whatever else. Or it's to your extent, I can't go back and keep doing and training and telling people the same things when I just saw something that I had no idea was a thing. Yeah. So anyhow.
And this is my opinion. It's interesting that Matt Prinka would say, I saw what was possible and then I wanted to attain that. And I think that's a positive way to create change in someone. But I think that takes a unique person. Yep. A lot of people experience something and they make the decision point, like you said, I'm either going to rise to that or that didn't actually happen, and they turn the blinders on. I think a more consistent way to invoke meaningful change is always through a stressful experience with some level of public vulnerability that leads to an extreme failure.
It's got to be hard.
Yeah. And I want you to lose. I want you to fail.
You have to.
And that failure, that's going to stick with you. And that's where we see the change. And on that comes the responsibility on the instructor side, which is the part that I really nerd out. It is cool, the things we do, but how we do it and what we do, that's the more important part. You have, and I don't think a lot of people understand it, a huge weight and responsibility with the information that you're presenting to these people who might leave the course and within 10 minutes leaving have to use it, and they're gonna think whatever that guy just told me is gonna save my life. I'm gonna do it. And if you told them bullshit, they'll buy it. So you have this huge responsibility in what you're saying and the experience that you're giving them, knowing you're intentionally giving them probably a failure. That failure is gonna happen in front of everyone else in the group, and they're all going to see this guy, a man, an adult, who's on the verge of tears because he just shot the wrong person, and he's got all this anxiety and stress and doesn't know how to manage it. That's a hard responsibility. That's a delicate responsibility that you have to manage. I think that's what creates impactful change, more so than wow, that's an amazing fighter. He does really good. I didn't know I could do that. Right. I want to do that.
Right.
And that is, I feel like I'm that person. I can watch it and I'm like, that's a thing. I want it.
Right.
But I don't think that's a normal. I don't think it's a consistent way for change.
Right. For some people, it's about the ego, right? They want to get better.
That came up too.
Yeah. I want to be better and better and better.
That is me.
It's not about, holy shit, I just almost died, you know? And now I'm not just learning so that I can beat Brian. I'm learning so that I don't get, killed.
I remember in my law enforcement career, a grizzled veteran telling me, all that shit you do where you drive out of state and, eat ramen noodles and sleep in your car or do all that kung fu shit, that's awesome, but you really learn this job by experience. Experience is the best way to learn. Well, not too much longer after that, after having some experiences that no one regionally had, what I realized the hard way is that one experience can cost you your life. Experience is expensive. Really, probably the best we can do in training is make an attempt at facilitating an experience, a realistic experience, without the consequence of actually killing another human being killed or injured yourself, and going through a horrendous legal battle, being doxxed or whatever. A facilitated experience without real-world consequence in an arena that demands shared public vulnerability. All of that, the synergy of all that is what really makes the coursework what it is.
So to Brian's point, well, to all of the points here, I think that is the challenge with what it is that you're teaching, right? Which I know that's an obvious statement, but in so many other things, you can get an immediate feedback mechanism of whether what you did worked or not, right? But you're doing it in a very controlled environment where there's a bunch of knowns. And there's generally, while there may be many ways to solve the problem, there is the best way to solve the problem. But because we don't have the time to teach you all of those other ways, we're going to give you this thing, which is that solution that you were talking about, Brian, where you let them leave, right? And you have, that should weigh heavily on you. Did I give them the right thing? But particularly in your point, Scott, knowing that, dude, that's probably not the right thing, and I can't keep doing that, is an interesting thing to think about. And again, just with what it is that you're teaching, the realities of where that fits into somebody's life, whether that's a law enforcement officer or just the average the soccer mom, right, who's worried about protecting herself and her kids and not being vulnerable and whatever else.
Or a door kicker downrange that's got to come back to his family.
Exactly.
And protect his brother.
However, the only way for that to be tested in most places is to actually having gone through that experience. And so I think a lot of people teaching stuff, right, haven't had the experience to be able to speak from. And,
we call them, Dave Grossman calls them virgins discussing sex.
This is a really good way of looking at it.
Which that's kind of accurate. I'm not a huge Grossman fan. I think he has utility, and some people need to hear his messaging. But that particular statement about virgins discussing sex is so apropos when it comes to this business. There are so many. Most people teaching in this business have not experienced actual, real, lethal, visceral violence.
But like you said, he says this a lot, you don't have to have experience, but if you have an experience that you can pull a cogent, meaningful, relative point, then we use it. I got robbed in Brazil by two kids once.
You did?
Yeah.
True story.
True story.
Okay.
My family's from Brazil, and so I still have family over there. I was there. 2 kids tried to rob me. It worked out okay.
But he looks Brazilian, doesn't he?
Yeah, very. You can hear it in my accent.
I didn't pick that up.
When I'm talking. But when we teach the course, I don't mention that. I don't mention every time I got into a fight over a gun, because it doesn't help. They're not here to hear the Creg story or the Brian story. They're here to see what we can do for them so that they leave better than when they came.
That's an important distinction to make.
So we don't tell war stories unless there's a specific teachable relative point that we can give from it. Then it doesn't become the Brian show or the Creg show.
I tell two war stories over the entire weekend, over 24 hours. There are 2, and I only tell those 2 to support a very specific point of instruction. That's it.
So it's intentional. It's
absolutely
not
intentional.
because it's the Creg
It
show,
happens.
I don't wanna look
It
cool.
happens.
Not to
at
say,
the,
look at me, I'm cool.
It happens at the same time, the same way, every single time. It's at a very specific point in the instruction. Okay, so yeah, it supports, our content.
It's also one of the challenges with the content, because to be able to replicate it without Creg is not easy. Mm-hmm. Not having those specific pieces of the story to impact, the lesson that you're trying to teach, So that's, and I think probably one of the most unique things about ShivWorks is there are not a lot of people that know how or would be able to teach it. And unfortunately, there's no instructor program for ShivWorks.
Right.
It's all mentorship, which is awesome. It's awesome because I think it keeps the quality and the integrity of the impact of the lessons and the impact of the experience that ShivWorks gives people.
So this brings up the question that I sort of posed that I said I was going to ask before we got on air, and that is about the business end of this. I mean, we've talked about the instructors a little bit, how you guys came into it as instructors, and Craig's talked about how that's impacted the business, impacted him personally, professionally, now how it's impacting other people. I just wonder, and I mentioned this again. I mentioned this off air, and that is what you have done in terms of building a team. People talk about their cadre of instructors. I have learned to ask the question, what does that mean? Does that mean you have some part-time instructors that you're able to call to backfill when you can't make a course? Does that mean you've got these guys that are AIs for you that come out and they're good at giving some feedback and they can perform the thing that you're performing as the lead instructor or as the man on the stage, kind of thing. And if you weren't there, could they do that? Then you can start getting into some very specific questions. Okay, well, they can do most of it. Okay, well, what's that mean, right? And then does that mean they're able to perform the thing? But more specifically, can they actually communicate the thing? All right. Well, then there's that, and then there's also now we're watching the students do the thing. I've showed the thing. I've communicated the thing. How do I now give feedback, right, to the most important person in the room, which is the person you're working for, which is the person that paid to be at your class or whatever else. That's what you're doing. You're working for them. Can you provide that information in a way that they can take away from it? So again, I look at the word cadre, the term, and I think it gets applied to a lot of things, but I have questions about what that means. So the question is about the cadre. I don't know how the instructor group, however you guys term it. But what I see is this is what I experienced, what my personal experience was in the short period of time, because you guys are giving a very condensed version of, giving people sort of some insights to what it is that you're doing here. That's the nature of the summit, right? So when we walked in before we even started, okay, this is what I got. All right, I think there was 5 guys up there yesterday. 6 guys up there yesterday. They're all put together, right? They're all wearing basically, I don't want to call it a uniform, but they look unified, right? Shirts are tucked in.
That's a good way of saying it.
They clearly.
Well, one shirt was not tucked in, and it's always unacceptable.
It's always the same dude.
Yeah.
So
I like.
So I love this, right? Because it's clearly. So
Your
what I'm
shirt's not
saying,
tucked
what I'm
in right
saying
now, Brian.
is,
This is a long.
this is not by happenstance.
No.
Right? This is calculated. Right? This is talked about. It's part of the thing. All right. So there's that. Right? And then there was an introduction phase. So Creg went around and made sure he introduced each instructor. He started with you, Scott, and then he moved to you, Brian, and then you went through each person. And so what I was able to listen to is the delivery of their basically their resume, which is not what the point was. It's more of an introduction and help provide some context to why they're here. Those were all very polished, very polished. I knew exactly who these people were, where they'd come from, and I knew it all in probably less than a minute, right? Okay, so now I have some buy-in. Now Creg comes over the top, kind of backfills it with his introduction. And this might sound corny to you guys, but this is what I watched in terms of how that message was delivered. And we can talk about the language piece, which is a huge part of why you guys are here, the words. But it was almost like a dance. Everybody knew where to be at what time to deliver the message. We're talking about efficiency and that 7-minute overage or whatever you said before. Everybody knows their role and where they are supposed to be. And at the same time, what I would assume when I start to look at that stuff is that if Scott's not here today, everybody just slides into position, right, to backfill the thing. That is atypical. It's atypical in a lot of things in business other businesses that I see too. That is not an easy thing to do, right? That is not an easy thing to do. I'm curious how that's been built.
So it's been built intentionally. It has been built by modeling. It's been built in so many murder boards, as we call them, where we just go over how it's, and I'll tell them, hey, look, like here's a good example. For years, I used to, before I had somebody on the road, I would have to pick people out from the class to demo with.
Yep.
Right?
That can go a lot of different ways,
That can go a lot of different ways.
Actually, he's got it down to a science. Yeah. It's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, that's a learned thing.
Yeah, it's part of my. We all have good pattern recognition. I have fairly, like if you look at my pattern recognition scores on an MMPI, they're fairly freakish.
I don't need to see that, man. I get it. They get that about you. That's what we're teaching.
But they I would pick people out and I would basically have to guide them while teaching. And I'll do things like I'll use my face and I'll use my voice. I'll say things, okay, now if Scotty were to throw a straight right, and the way I'm saying it, I'm raising them open, I'm motioning, but also the cadence of my voice is what's creating the pace that I want him to throw the punch. So if I said, hey, if Scotty throws a straight right, bop, and my demo's screwed up, right? So I have to use my voice in kind of a Pavlovian way. We do that. And so we use our voice when we run the range because we use the imagery of toggle, switch, and knob.
I use that one all the time.
We use that one quite a bit.
All the time, yeah.
A single stimuli like an air horn or a buzzer or a timer, that's a toggle switch. There's no variability.
Yep.
Where with my voice, if I want to slow people down on the range, I'll slow the cadence of speech down. If I want to speed them up, I'll clip. Draw versus draw, depending on what's happening on the line. So I'll do that with people. I used to have to do that with people before I had
to manage the tempos.
To just to have a good demo. So I use that same practice that I use on the range and using my voice to control people, right? Because that's what you're doing. You're using your voice to elicit certain behaviors, create certain behaviors you want people to do. Mm-hmm. So once they came on board, now I think we never had specific, there was never specific discussion about, okay, I need you right here. I think basically the way it evolved was Scotty and Brian were both well practiced, and as they came on board with me, that because they were so engaged, they just kind of were part of they were part of they made themselves part of the delivery without us having specific conversations about, hey, Brian, I need you 3 feet to my left, right? They were just there, and I would just turn, and they would know to turn with me. So Brian were to throw a straight, and that's how it went from there. And then now we don't have to I don't have to lead them. They know what to do. So it's about time, and everything comes with tenure and time, right? It doesn't matter. The key to being good at anything is reps. Mm-hmm. I don't care whether it's reps on the range, reps on the mat, or reps teaching. We can tell people who have time and tenure and are well practiced. They have a lot of frequency. We're on the road 40 weeks a year doing this. But you can tell the delivery of somebody. It's funny that you mentioned the introduction piece, because in mentoring a lot of these younger guys, they'll ask me, hey, what can I do? I said, you can unfuck your introduction. If you walk out there and you say, hey, I'm I'm John. I give Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Man, I'm just really glad to be here. And, anything you need. If you can't speak about, and this is the way, because when you say, hey, man, your introduction's all fucked up, right? They get defensive and they're like, well, I don't like talking about myself. And my answer to that has always been, look, man, you know you better than any other human being on the planet. And if you can't tell me about yourself, why the fuck would I listen to anything else you say?
100% agree. Mm-hmm.
And once they realize that, they're like, intros matter. They do matter. It is absolutely part of Aristotelian rhetoric.
It sets the tone,
yeah,
right, and the stage for everything that happens after that. In terms of being open to receiving any information.
You said the plain language version. We have to get the buy-in. Where does the buy-in start? It's in the introduction. It's also why our introductions don't have to be long. I don't have to give the extensive resume because Creg is setting it up. He's building the position of authority with his longer introduction. That's why he has to tell more about the background. I don't have to do that. I can leave a lot out. What am I doing right now? This is where I came from. This is what I'm going to do in the future. Simple. He built the authority. He built the buy-in for us.
The cool thing is it doesn't look rehearsed though. No. That's the beauty of the way he, like if Scotty with his right hand
polished though
puts it here and goes for that. It's polished, but it's also, it's a dance that he's leading, and then we just fell in, but the students don't really see that it's like rehearsed, like these guys just do the same thing. They're robots, bots, blah, 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 blah. Yep. That's not what it is. It's cool. So that's how it kind of becomes natural.
A recent change in ShivWorks culture has been less of me leading the dance as I did historically, more now into pointed specific conversations. So now we are, and at this point, there's not a single thing that's random. There's not a single moment that's unconsidered in that course.
Oh, that was clear to me.
Not a single.
It was clear.
There's no random word. There's no random moment. Everything, every piece, every second is intentional. All of it. And when I ended, I said, well, let's see where I'm at on time. And I was at 9:59 because I know the time hack. I know this is the other reason we're so consistent. If you don't deliver, and this is part of my mentorship piece to a lot of these younger guys, besides an introduction, be consistent with what you say. If you teach an arm drag, you should teach an arm drag the same way every time. Don't have any variance in the arm drag. And if you don't do it the same way every time, you now have no idea how long the arm drag takes to teach, right? So when I hear guys say things, I'll ask them, hey, did you do X in the course last weekend? Man, I just ran out of time. You didn't run out of time, dude. You didn't manage time.
You didn't manage the time properly.
And one of the reasons you didn't manage the time is because you don't do it the same way every single time. So last week, the arm drag took 4 minutes. This week, the arm drag took 6 minutes. Next week, it took 7.5, depending on questions you fielded from people. And you can't, that's the only way to have a consistent, cogent beginning, middle, and end, is to say it the same way over and over and over again. We're adamant. The other reason we do this, if I say it the same way and there's a level of automaticity in my instructorship that frees my conscious mind up to pay attention to how it's being received. Mm-hmm. So now, because I am well rehearsed and I don't have to think about what I'm saying, I can look at people and I can see this guy's falling asleep.
Checked out. Yep.
This guy thinks I'm full of shit. Mm-hmm. This chick thinks I'm hot. Mm-hmm. This, whatever, right?
Gotcha.
The whole,
it can never happen.
So
I don't get that one.
But you get what I'm saying, because I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. I'm not thinking about my delivery. I don't have to think about my delivery. I deliver 40 weeks a year and have for 22 years. Okay, I know what I'm going to say. So now I can pay attention and really, really see how it's being received. I can walk in on people and loom a little bit, right? Or I can randomly, seemingly call people up. There's nothing random there, but I'm like, hey, let me do a little demo here. Let me show you actually what I'm talking about. Who's got quick hands? Now everybody's like, fuck.
Is it me? I don't know.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So, but there's nothing random, and there's nothing.
It's not just receiving. It's that frees you up to assess them as individuals, because at the end,
go with that.
At the end of the day, I'm gonna pick two strangers and ask them to try and hurt each other. And that, just from the business liability standpoint, that's huge. I'm gonna tell two people who don't know each other to grab T-guns and shoot each other as hard as they can. I better have a good pairing if I'm gonna do that. They're not random, and I think that we are very, very good at pairing people. Very good. We rarely have any injuries. Sprained ankle because someone tripped in a hole while they were walking uninvolved with the course.
There's going to be people listening to this right now, and they're going to go, man, that sounds really rigid. That sounds really like mechanical.
It's not. That's my point.
Yeah,
it's
so that's
natural.
so I was going to go with this. So does this mean, because there is this, everything has been weighed and measured, does that mean it can't or doesn't evolve?
No, it does.
No.
It does all the
So let's
time.
talk about that.
Yeah, it constantly.
And how does it do that?
So a lot of times it will evolve in smaller classes or a bespoke class. So, for example, this is a good one. We had never done an edged weapons overview specifically for law enforcement, and we had a request by Midland, Texas to do that.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay. So it's not an open enrollment, so what's going to change for the law enforcement environment? Managing unknown contacts is going to become managing field contacts. We're to do that first. We teach a binary end state of using a knife where people are trying to get someone off them and keep someone off of them. So keep someone off me is probably not really relevant for a police officer, because if this is outside of entanglement,
different rules of engagement,
he's probably going to a handgun. So the limit, right, of that. So all of that gets evaluated. We reformat it. We know how much time it takes. We put this here, put this here. So we have a new course that we reshuffle and reformat, a bespoke course, if you will. And then in the bespoke course, we're like, let's try this. I want to try this. And if we've got the time hack down, which we do, then we know where we can speed up. We know where we can open time to
steal some time back
to try something new. So we did that with how we teach escape theory. And what we did was we came up with a drill, because we've never liked, based on the time we have, where people are at with their duck under. Okay. Most people shut the arm. They don't squat. Squatting is laborious. It's the first thing that tends to go. So we have a drill in the curriculum that's our first drill, where we teach the operating system, and we teach people about pressure, and specifically how pressure affects posture. So we have the mountain goat drill. That's where you take a MMA glove, you put that between your heads, you don't use your hands.
You have to keep that pressure on.
And you have to drive and not be driven, take space, don't yield space. So what it forces you to do is align yourself properly from the crown of your head to your tailbone without grabbing someone. So that's what creates proper posture. And it's really effective to teach wrestling posture in a highly compressed time format, because you feel it. You get instant feedback. It's like shooting steel.
And you either can or you can't.
And you either can or you can't. So we tell them, it teaches you three things. It teaches you about the swivel of your hips, the tilt of your hips, and the height of your hips. That demo I do with my hand, right? Swivel, tilt, height. That's what's going on with your hips. And the object of the game is to have your hips squared, slightly rolled backward, putting your weight forward and lower than the adversary. So having that, we started looking at the duck under, and we're like, if the problem is people not engaging their torso, why don't we just figure out a way to teach them a duck under without using their arms?
Right.
So we came up with the scarecrow drill, right? So the scarecrow drill is where we have them stand. You put your arms out like a scarecrow. You start at 90 degrees to the your training partner. The coaching cues are squat, swivel, connect. And you squat, you swivel under the arm, and you reconnect back. Squat, swivel, connect, squat, swivel, connect. So we do 20 reps left, 20 reps right. Now we'll add a bicep tie and an underhook and say, okay, from an underhook, you flank, squat, swivel, connect. You know? A regrip off the wrist tie, we're going to regrip, squat, swivel, connect. But it's the same coaching cues. And when we do it that way and they get the first 20, 40 reps total of just squatting, now the arm shuck on the duck under, that's gone. And they're ducking under properly. They're actually squatting. So we did this, and because we're doing it for the very first time, it's like, fuck, I have no idea how much time this is going to take. Yeah. So I have to steal time back in the coursework. And we watch the effect of it. First of all, how is it working? And we're like, I think it's working better. So we start doing it that way. And over the next few courses,
you toggle switches, or you toggle switches, and
we refine a little bit. Refine a little bit.
Originally, it was flank, squat, swivel, swivel, connect.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, that's kind of a wordy.
That's too many words.
So we start chopping it down. The next course too was San Diego.
Yep.
And then worked well. Still took a lot longer than the old way we taught it. And then we went to Pennsylvania, and I told Creg, I want to cut 1 rep of non-consensual and competitive drilling from the very first 3 drills that we do, to buy that time and add it to the duck under. He said, well, you can't take it off the first drill, the mountain goat drill that he described. And I'm like, well, why not? And he's like, what are you doing during that drill? Now, they're learning posture, but the instructor side of it, the assessment side, I'm like, well, I'm trying to see who understands fighting, who can stay upright, who already has that. And that is the answer. That's a answer. And they said, but what else? More importantly, what is it doing? That is their first exposure to legitimate stress and pressure against a stranger. It's the first time you can emotionally evaluate someone when you really force them something. So I can't take away the 3 1-minute drills, the 3 1-minute partner switches that we have, because that's the first chance to find the guy who's extremely technically competent. He's very, very physically able, but he has no emotional control. And when his head hits another guy's head, he sees red and he has no composure. I can't put that guy with the 50-year-old woman, you know, as opposed to the guy who he's a D1 wrestler, and for whatever reason, he's composed no matter what. And I might be able to put him with a guy who's 73 years old. Because despite him being a giant, scary man, he's so emotionally controlled that he's going to protect them and give them the experience that we think they need. And that's how we started evaluating it and changing it. And now we're at a point where, I think the duck under is very efficient at getting people who have never done a single athletic thing in their life to do a duck under in one day.
And that makes it faster.
And the other thing too is, so we have the module after live fire that we call the base of and strategy for using wrestling in a weapons-based environment. That traditionally is 4 hours. So we have 3 hours in the range, lunch, 4 hours, and then the next application, in-fight weapons access, is the intersection of the range and the grappling, where we plug a gun in and say, okay, this is how it all works together, and we get reps. What we saw was within 4 months, now what used to take 4 hours, now it's taking 3.5. So now we bought time back. It's like, okay, where are we going to use that time?
Yeah,
where do they need it? Right?
Where's the value?
They probably need it more in technical and consensual drilling of in-fight weapons access, which we do. And now because they get more reps without resistance, when we do add sims, helmets, and resistance,
that's starting to look better.
That's starting to look better. So now, again, the end state is, all right, they're better. And it's just that one change. We made that change. We did that. We piloted that last December. So, and we'll still, like every day, we'll be driving back, 12 hours. And Brian's like, I don't like the way that went today. I'm like, what didn't you like? And this doesn't stop.
So let me ask you this. The question then is going back, so you said you implemented it last December. So how long did it take to finally realize, like, we think well, I don't want to say we fixed it, but we know this change is the solid change and we're good, at least for now, until you discover the next thing?
I'd say 3 or 4 months.
Okay, that's the answer I'm looking for.
I'd say 3 or 4.
It doesn't have to be a perfect number. I'm just saying 3 to 4 months of studying this.
I'd say 3 or 4
debriefing it, briefing it before you go. These are the things we're doing. Everybody on board with this, right? Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing here and what we're looking for. Take these notes. These are what we're paying attention to. Then the debrief. Then you have to run it again, right? Live. So you have to go to the next class. And my point of this is
I'd say 11. I'd say 3 or 4 months, 10, 11 classes.
Okay, so just the fact that you know that speaks to all the things that I was speaking to before. I'm going to go all the way back to the introduction. So I'm going to take a little side trip here.
Yeah.
So my story is for people that know me. I've spent a lot of time. It's going to get cold to get these guys to settle down.
Or just move them. Just move them a little away.
Yeah.
Just move them that way.
If they give you a hard time, I'm going to sick Brian and Scott on them.
Shut up.
Yeah. So I've been in the fitness industry a long time, know a lot of things, man. For a long time, I worked for a company, a big corporation, and that corporation spent a lot of money in employee development, and I happen to be a very fortunate recipient of a good amount of that. I have a lot to thank them for, while I have my druthers with a lot of the things, like whatever. It was an institution, right?
You're only the second.
Use the word druthers.
That's my word. He calls it my old man word. He loves my old man word. He said, nobody says that. So you just said that word, Scott. That's awesome.
Let's be all together.
That's a great word.
So I was a recipient of some and very fortunate to receive a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that I got charged with doing was teaching sales to a large part of the corporation. And one of the things they did was, first off, I was kind of being evaluated and tested in some of the things I was doing, so they were looking at me. And then I went through a course, a sales course that they offered, and I went, man, this is life-changing. Like, there's all these skills that I just learned in a different way. But I was enamored by the instructor and his ability to deliver the message. So there was some talent there, and there was a skill that he was demonstrating. But there was also a very organized approach to doing that, and I took it again. I was asked to take it again. And again, I didn't know this, but I was being evaluated, right, during this time. And it was done exactly the same way by a different person, but it was done exactly the same way as the first guy did it. This next person that did it a little bit differently, but the information was the same. Okay, so then I get tapped. And I actually had gone and I asked, like, hey, what can I want to do more than the job that I'm doing. Where can you guys use me? And the guy's like, this is perfect. You didn't know this, but we were going to come to you anyway, kind of thing. So they sent me away to this course. And that's how that course was developed. And we took that back, and then I delivered that hundreds of times, in my time there, for the time that I was doing that part of the job. My point of that is this is what professional organizations, this is a Fortune 500 company, at the time, right? This is what Fortune 500 companies do. This is what businesses do. More specifically, this is what professionals do. And we spent 2 hours of a 5-day, 8-hour day course, 2 hours on the introduction. How do you not fuck this up? Because the person walks in the gym to get the buy the membership or whatever. You don't know who you're dealing with. What are some of the things you need to take care of right away? And you're not going to get anywhere with this. You're not going to be able to pry that credit card away from that lady for that $3,000 membership, because that's what we were charging at the time, right? If you mess this up. So how do you do that? Spend 2 hours on that. And the first stuff was all the nonverbal stuff. At the time, your polo shirt's going to be tucked into your pants. You're going to have your name tag on straight. You're not going to have mustard on one side of your shirt, mayonnaise on the other. You're going to be clean cut. Your hair is not allowed to be below your collar, right? You will have no facial hair. You will have no earrings or things hanging out of your ears, your nose. I'm just saying this because this was the thing that struck me the most here, that is a thing that I think is a massive missing piece. I'm just going to say in the industry of preparedness, whether that's firearms training, combatives training.
I'm going to tuck my shirt.
BJJ schools or whatever else.
Just so we're squared away.
See what I did there? See what I did there, Craig?
I appreciate it.
So now we know what motivates the guy, right? We just talk about him without talking to him.
Shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Shame.
So, see how I read the room?
Yeah. That was awesome.
That's a industry, and Craig always says it, but anyone who sees the flashy IG video can start trying to do something within this sphere. So industries have standards. There's no standards here. There's no governing body that says you need to be able to do X in order to present X. For better or worse, right? There's definitely some downsides to not having that, and there's some good sides. But that is formal presentation, and people, very few people, I think, are even exposed to formal presentation, let alone instructed on how to do it. And if you have been, it will change how you communicate with other people, for sure, in every way. How you evaluate, the way they're reading the conversation, the way you present yourself physically towards them, how you posture, how you move, all of that matters. And I think a lot of guys who are teaching, they're still lean heavily towards the user. And I still think of myself that way. I'm still the SWAT guy-ish. Mm-hmm. I don't do anything. I don't have anyone saying you have to go run for your PT test. But I'm not terribly far removed from the user. The further you get from being the user to solely being a presenter, I think that helps you develop your presentation, and you get you crisp up your delivery for sure. But a lot of people are users. They see it. It looks fun. And that's the extent of their decision-making into getting into it. So they're just like, this is fun. I'm good at it. I can make some money. I want to show people, even if it's noble, I want to show people this because it's really good and it really works. And that's the extent of their thought process. So there is no, how could I present this better? It's just, this is fun. Let's do it.
Yeah, and I think the and with that is there's a very low barrier of entry to actually be able to then do that, right? Put something in your bio, say you're a business and you're an instructor and whatever you are. I guess my takeaway, my point of bringing all that up, and you guys done such a really good job of, another word, words matter here, but eloquently describing it, is that it's easy for you to do it. It's not work. Because this is how you handle things. And this is how I handle myself at work, and this is how I handle myself in life. And clearly there's going to be different filters. I mean, listen, I listen to you guys present, and then I've had some on the side conversations, and it's different. Yeah, it's different, and it should be. But at the same time, the fundamental principles of all of that never change. Craig is still using that voice inflection that he talked about, right? When he's delivering a message, I ask a question, or we're just having a conversation. He's still using that body language. He's still using that eye contact the same way you guys are. I watched you guys when we started the show. You were talking about you guys just went through that little thing out there on the floor, whatever that was, where you're kind of tossing around ideas and people were listening to you. And there were pauses that were in there that were very familiar to me because I had listened to you do that downstairs when you were talking to other people. That being, somebody would ask a question. You'd sit there, and I think there was a question about height and, some of the things you were talking about. This is my impression. Tell me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. If I am, I want to know. But there was a pause when he asked you this question. And to me, what I was reading that as is, I want you to now pause and sit in the question that you just asked. Because I think pretty quickly you could have figured that out on your own if you had thought about that a little longer. And are you with me now? Good. I knew you would get that, right? That kind of thing.
Yes.
And so that's why I don't know anything you just, you were saying, because I couldn't really hear a lot of it, but I did hear that much. And that to me, again, resonates in kind of this professionalism and treating this thing like a business. And when I say the thing, I mean combatives, and the firearms training you bring to it. And if what you're coming here to ShivWorks for is Craig, just tell me how to stab people and shoot people in the face, man, you are missing the entire point of this thing, right? Because going back to the experience, what you walked away with was not the how to stab people in the face or shoot people in the face, stab people in the neck. You probably could have done that anyways. It was that realization of, holy crap, there is so much here. And the way it got delivered was so impactful, going back to, what you were talking about, Brian. You have just changed my life. Not because you showed me how to use this defensive technique better or whatever else. You've got me to look at this completely different. And that's what the summit has been for a lot of people. That's what it is for me. That's what I wanted to come here for and learn. And so again, I don't want to belabor this and beat this up, but I had asked Does that mean it can't evolve, right? And how did the business get here to where it is? And when I started the podcast, I said, I think this is going to be a different conversation than what most people probably would expect or think it is. Yeah. This is what I thought it was going to be. Right. And these conversations are not happening. They're happening here with this group. And if you're lucky enough, you can work with this group or you can work with Creg and he can mentor you and do that other stuff. But if what you're coming to learn is the defensive technique and the pokey stabby stuff, like that is part of it. But there's so much more to this, and what can people take away from this? And to your point, the next question is, and I want to make a point about this, is when people see this on the interwebs, right? And you guys are hopefully at this point now, if people have made it this far on the podcast, they can listen to the question I'm about to ask and they can think about it and pause, right, for a second. Because when I see what you guys are putting out, like on social media, to me, and it always has looked this way, it's very calculated. And why the fuck wouldn't it be based on everything we just said, right? At the same time, if you're not looking at it that way, this looks very obscure, right? It looks weird, right? Like that's murder, dude.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, right? I wonder how you guys are challenged with this in terms of delivering your message and kind of putting the message out in that sense when what you've described is so hard to do on those types of platforms. All of you can answer this, yeah.
So first, that's crowd work. That's what we refer to all of that. How do I interact with the audience? There's some easy techniques that Creg has helped me with. It's difficult, I think, for me to create the connection and empathy that is required to get lasting learning. Sometimes I can be pretty callous, but I've gotten better with that over time, for sure. We talk about it.
Takes practice.
Yeah, we talk about it every course. This was good. You handled this debrief well. It was a guy really messed up. It was a sensitive debrief. You could have tried to exploit this vein of it a little bit more, and you could have let go of that side. So that's all crowd work. But what ShivWorks actually teaches, other than stabbing people and shooting them, which is the flashy IG eye catch stuff.
I know it might be insulting. That's not
no.
To prove a point.
It's not. I'm agreeing with you. That is that's the hook. What we actually teach is social literacy. That's it. How do we improve social literacy in people who are gonna carry guns or knives amongst other people in the public, whether it's professionally or other? How do we improve their social literacy? If we can do that, they probably won't need to use the gun ever.
Which is what you've been teaching, which was the basis of yesterday's discussion.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about that because you brought it up. I have some notes and you just reminded me of those notes. And that is that term, social literacy. There was another one there. I might have to refer back to it. There were two things that I think you were trying to build into to this thing, and that was one of them.
Social literacy, verbal agility.
That's it, verbal agility. Yeah, which those skills are critical in business, relationships, self-defense, offense, all of those kind of, you can put those in anywhere, and we are, as a society, are lacking that at a very high level. And when you get into an environment like this, if it was lacking at all, like take 15 percentage points off of that, right? And that is the thing, that's the 15 percentage points could mean the difference between you living or dying in a particular situation. So can we talk just a little bit about some of the context of how that applies in the training, in the delivery of in the messaging that I heard from you guys yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a little bit of it? Yeah.
So the first thing is, I think if we're teaching people the most effective and insidious ways of carving up and shooting other human beings, how can you not demand social literacy, right? How can you not, to do that, I think it's fairly irresponsible. I think there's a lot of unhealthy shit in this racket. And like Brian, we don't use the word industry because it's not an industry. It's a loose collection of personality-driven fiefdoms. That's what it is. It is, But I've always felt if I'm gonna if I'm going to give people these skills, then my responsibility to teach them as best as I can, social literacy and verbal agility, and not let it get there. I think if you're teaching people, if you're sending poorly adjusted, armed people out into the public, that's irresponsible. And as I've gotten older, and watched kind of what's happened with people, not just the younger generation, but people even my age, the people who are there's a lot of bad mental health, man. There's a lot of bad emotional health. There's a lot of disconnected people, and people more than ever. I suspect that it's due to technology, and all the reading and research.
We'll know more in a little while.
I was going to say,
we'll learn.
But I think I see it a lot. We see it every weekend. We see people who are armed and maladjusted with a perception of what a problem is and how they're going to fix it. And we see people all the time draw guns when they shouldn't. We run a full spectrum evolution on Sunday in ECQC that ties in everything from a harsh word to a gunshot and everything literally in between.
Yep.
Right? And when we do that in a class of 20 people, typically I'll say, hey, all right, we've seen people come together and talk and leave, and it's completely benign. We've seen words raised and fists fly, and guys get up and walk away. We've seen people who get in fist fights and draw weapons and don't use them. We see them get in fist fights, draw weapons, and use them. We see them draw weapons preemptively and not use them. We see them draw weapons and use them when they absolutely shouldn't have, right? And when you look at all of these outcomes and how many of them was marksmanship a significant factor in a win or a loss? And when you frame it that way, and then you say, okay, now contrast that with how much of your actual time you spend developing that skill. Marksmanship and putting a bullet at speed where it needs to be right now, that's an excellent problem-solving modality in a very narrow range of problems in a much wider swath of humanity. So one of the things about an interdisciplinary course is that it's a paradigm shift for people on a well-placed word is as potent as a well-placed shot in a given moment. And that's one of the big lessons in our coursework is that. And I demand it. I'm adamant about it. I preach hard about this more and more every day. In fact, and this module, because the language component, the social literacy component is so underserved in the training community. I'm like, you know what? We're at the Combatives Conference. Everybody's doing, combative stuff. We are going to serve this piece, right? And it's interesting that John makes everybody do it, right? Because the way the conference starts off the way the conference started off this year was everybody did his module. So mostly everybody here should be here, and they can more or less pummel an underhook, and
all the instructors get to stand back.
And then the next thing that happens is everybody does my module, right? So that's how the rest of the physical activity is framed for the weekend. And when we present and we come on board, what the attendees see is us in lockstep, delivering at a level of precision that they're not accustomed to, and it sets the tone for the rest of the conference.
And not only that, people don't realize the friction that knowing how to talk and knowing how to have that verbal agility applies friction on somebody that it's powerful, and people don't realize how powerful it is. And it's like Creg says sometimes, you want to be as verbally agile as a comedian. I mean, that's
when
how
he's working the crowd.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's the black belt of verbal agility and social literacy. You know, the guy that can stand up in the room and somebody can heckle him and he can go right back and heckle him right back without, you know, losing the room, you know, and about not getting mad.
Again, not getting out of control emotionally.
Exactly.
At the same time.
Exactly.
Emotional control and temperament is extremely important. If we were to think of what is the most important self-defense skill that you can possibly have, that every single person in here did it the moment they left the conference, and then when they leave today, they will do it again. It is talking. It's communication, verbal agility. And it doesn't mean that you have to be able to speak really, really fast and tell jokes and get the other guy to laugh. It means that whatever current course of action you're trying to take with your communication that's not working, you realize immediately it's not working, you switch to another one. Carrot, stick, comedy, anger, increase the volume, decrease the volume, increase the vocal fray in your voice, make a longer pause, give some compliance, cooperative compliance, stop, and I'll talk to you. Can you do that? That's the verbal agility part. And then our social literacy. If a person approaches you, can you read them properly? Do you understand the kinesics? What is that body telling you? What are their words telling you? What is their demeanor telling you? And can you describe all of those? That part is hard, the description, explaining what you're seeing. And we've been having this conversation. How are we good at assessing a person? How can I look at someone and I'm able to say that guy, if he gets one more point of friction, is going to be so task saturated he'll lose his composure. How are any of the three of us good at that? We're good at pattern recognition. We have some fairly high level experience, whatever that means to people. But there's guys who can do it with none of that. So what makes you good at that? That's kind of the thing we've been exploring. How do I articulate what makes us good at it so we can give that better to people?
Somebody else.
Because if they take that away from the course, that will serve them way better than the thumb pectoral index that they'll probably never use. Though if they need it, that's the best way to solve that tiny problem.
And we initially give them the hack, right? We give them the playlist so that they can do this with automaticity and not have to think about it in the moment, which frees them up to be able to do what Brian's saying.
Be available.
Brian's saying that now I can look at what your body's telling me as my mouth does what it does by being very simple with my playlist when somebody approaches me and I don't know what they want.
Yeah, and the current this is the current discussion internally with us, and we don't have the answer yet. But the current conversation internally is when we're watching people in an evolution, which is our validation exercise for the day's training,
right?
Non-consensual and competitive. But then we give people definitions for those phrases within our lexicon. So when we watch them and you can see they're foundering, they're right on the edge. How do we know, like when we look at a particular person and say, all right, now's the time to call it, send us somebody else, blah, blah, blah. We can kind of, titrate him.
Yep. That's a good word. I like that word.
We can kind of titrate him and figure that out in the moment. And we read that, I would say, probably with 95% accuracy. And we were specifically asked that in Massachusetts 2 weeks ago.
Oh, is that right?
We were asked that by Ian Davis. Ian's like, man, how did you know that doing that would have that effect on that guy? Because he wants to know. He wants the formula, right? He gets an equation, X plus Y equals Z.
Yeah, yep.
So we had to think about it and we're kind of looking at each other and like, I just know. Well, that's, if we get to a point where we say internally or externally when we're asked a question, I just know. I'm like, okay, we obviously haven't done a deep dive.
Yep. It's time to talk about
We haven't done a deep dive into that. Right. So that's a big klaxon.
That's where the empathy comes in.
That's a big klaxon for we need to get into the weeds on this internally. And we need to have this conversation internally and actually figure this out.
Right now it's nebulously floating and I'm gripping for it and it's keeping me up at night.
You know what's cool though is that you guys are okay with that. Like you recognize and you're okay with that. It doesn't provide anxiety. It provides a new challenge or something to explore or whatever.
It's exciting.
That's the next word I would have been used. I think I just would have said something more like that just incites that exploratory process for you guys to go down and have your discussions. And so, there's people listening to this going, man, there's a lot of words here, right? Like
Words hurt.
Social literacy, verbal agility, man. Creg, that just sounds like a bunch of buzzwords.
Yeah, and coming from Mississippi, that's a big word.
Yeah, are you sure? Like, do you even know what that means?
We had to filter out a lot of the buzzwords. There was a lot before I came on. And then we got rid of both of them.
But the reason I say that is like, and again, like that doesn't surprise me at all. Like, should we say this word or not say this word?
Yeah, we have these.
Exactly. That one goes on the no list, right? This is the yes list. I guess my point in bringing that up is there could be people thinking that right now. And they're gonna.
That's why I gave the definition for social literacy. We can't talk about something unless we define it. We're going to define weapon retention. Okay, well, you better have a problem framing murder board of weapon retention shooting. Shooting within arm's reach. What is that? Your specified task is it has to be retainable, accountable, and predictable. You can make a dumb version of each of those. Retainable, I probably need one hand. Accountable, I can't shoot people who don't deserve to be shot. Predictable, I need to be able to place it in the same exact place every time on demand, knowing it's not going to hit myself. Well, what does that lead us to? The implied task. If it's retainable, meaning I have to be able to do it with one hand, it probably has to be back here somewhere. If it has to be accountable, that means I can't have a horizontal line of trajectory on that outgoing round because it's going to go until it's stopped by something. What does that eliminate? This. Why? Because that's going to go off. So what do we do to solve that? This. Is that awkward as fuck? Yeah. So why do we have it stood off? Well, if I have it stood off by the magazine, this is going to wiggle around. It's not going to be predictable, so it's not consistent. That doesn't meet a specified task. Now, thumb against here, fingers against the rib, high angle, flag thumb, locked wrist, downward angle. That gives you the thumb pectoral. And we do that for every single topic that we teach. Problem frame, specified task, implied task.
The reason I brought it up and the reason I said that was partly to make a joke, but partly also to challenge the listener out there and anybody that would say that, because I hear that term being used like inappropriately. Yeah. Like this is just a buzzword. I was challenged by somebody on the internet the other day.
Yeah, we bring that shit up all the time.
I made the mistake. I hadn't done it in a couple of years actually, where I actually entertained that and got into this ridiculous waste of time and space, responding to things. So I make it a rule not to do that. I broke my own rule and I suffer the consequences. I'm an idiot.
And then you realize it's a bot.
Yeah, probably.
Never go to Paul.
Why'd you put that in my head? Now I feel even worse about myself.
Now you've been controlled by a bot.
Right. So again, I say all that to say, because if those words scare you or they bother you, I'd be challenging the listener to ask themselves, why is that? Why is this so uncomfortable for you to hear those words and then immediately go to the buzzword in quotations? Like this is the buzzword thing. And my response to that is if you can't do that, or if you just want to throw your hands up and go, whatever, man, well, then have fun in fucking third grade and have fun living your life there.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're going to stay. And again, bringing this all the way back, that's why I came to listen to ShivWorks. That's why I wanted the ShivWorks crew on this podcast or in front of me. Like I have a very distinct privilege of people giving me their time, like you guys are giving me your time today. And when I have that time, man, I try to extract as much value out of it as I can. And here's the thing, going back to that third grade, statement is if that's the way you're thinking about it, then my bet is because you haven't been in the right room enough times with those types of people. And what you're doing is you're staying in the same room with the people that aren't challenging you. Like, again, going back to the bringing on team members, challenging you to sharpen your skills in social literacy and verbal agility, right, as an example. And until you do that, it's going to be very easy for you to step back into, again, going back to my example before, we were talking about Matt, your little comfort zone of just answering that or responding to that with, oh, those are just buzzwords. My challenge is I don't think you have spent the time to think about what that even means. And for that, not that I'm saying you haven't earned a ticket to this conversation, not saying that, but you can get into this conversation, but you have to understand that you're just getting into listening to the conversation. Shut up, listen, right, and be open to it. And that's one way to go about it. It's kind of a negative way. Or pay attention to the introduction, right?
Sure.
And if you're doing that, and I mean that from the instructor perspective too, right? And from the consumer perspective, man, you could take so much more away from the experience that you get. And it's not just about shooting people in the face, right? Kind of thing.
One of our functions at this summit is to force this community to have graduate level discussion. I was very adamant about, look, we don't, we're donating our time. This company does not need this conference to get out there and be seen.
I had that same conversation with Tom Kyer 5 minutes before we started.
Yeah.
About why he's here.
Yeah.
So, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Tom doesn't need it. Everyone knows who he is, right? So what I want to do is I want to force this community into grad school. I'm tired of the freshman conversation. It's time to go from the third to the fourth and the fifth grade, right? We need to...
Let's move on, man.
Yeah, let's move on and force this community to do that. And that's one of the reasons I'm supporting the summit and supporting all of the diversity here, at the bride's favorite word.
That's another big word.
That's another diversity.
Big,
I have a list of words.
I'm not going to even ask what everybody's definition of that is. We're going to leave that one alone.
But no, it's seriously though, man. It's we want to have these. I want to have these discussions, right?
I can tell.
I want to have these discussions. I want people to say something to me. I want to hear something that's impactful. I want to hear something that changes my point of reference. I want to get into the fucking weeds about this.
Man.
I do, right? I mean, and that still, I've been doing this a long time. I'm closer to 60 than 50, I don't know how old are you, Scott?
I'm 49.
There we go. So,
closer to 50 than I am 49.
Wait till you hit 50.
So wait till you hit 50, man.
Then he's going to give you the breakdown.
I'll give it to him. I'll give it to him right now. I'll give it to him right now.
This is what he told me, because I turned 50 in January.
The difference between 40 and 50. 40 is novel. 50 is stark. So at 40, when you turn 40, you're kind of like still kind of doofy and stupid. You're like, I turned 40. Guess I got to be an adult, grow up, get a job. Move out of my mom's house, whatever. Yeah.
Move out of my mom's house.
So 40's novel. 50 is stark. And here's why. At 40, you can see 80. At 50, you can't see 100. That's the bottom line. So when you really understand, I've spent more time here than I've got left. All of a sudden, how you spend your time and who you spend that time with and what it's doing, that gets really important.
Well, that started for me a bit ago.
There's none to waste.
That's the birthday present he gave me on my 50th birthday. He tells me this story, and I'm like,
really great
dude, go fuck yourself. like, thank you. Now I'm an asshole.
My life is, he's like, fuck.
Now I'm going to be an asshole.
My life is stark.
Yep. Now I got to be grumpy Scott.
Now I got to think about that.
Yeah. Now I got to be grumpy Scott instead of freaking, happy-go-lucky. I got freaking 80 years. I could do 80 years.
So no, I want to force this community into a higher level of collegiality, a higher level of instructorship, a higher level of precision.
Precision matters.
That's everything.
Ambiguity is where bad decisions are made.
All the time.
And it's good to spend time there, but we should remove as much ambiguity
as you can.
As possible. I think it's really important. And buzzwords are ambiguous. They're marketing terms.
Ambiguous, not ambiguous. I mean,
I will escape out of this place immediately.
Enunciating with the tone and the voice.
I'll walk across this freaking room and punch you in the face.
I'll just escape.
No, but I don't like ambiguity. It stresses me out. I hate it. And buzzwords are totally in that category. And they're just marketing terms that people put in the copyright. So they say stupid stuff like be aware, check your six. We pressure tested this. What does that mean? What does it mean to pressure test something? Can you explain it to me? How do you be aware? How do you do it? Tell us.
What was that process?
Yeah. What skill did you use to be aware? What does that actually mean? Have you spent any time reading Boyd's work? Do you know where situational awareness comes from, or the deep, rich aviation history that brought it into the industries outside of aviation? Because now it's adopted by everyone. Everyone uses it. Situational awareness. Where does it come from? What's the definition? How do you improve it? What is it? I think people just throw these words out and put them on a T-shirt. Mindset, awareness, aggression.
People think
De-escalate.
People think words are verbs that aren't verbs. Aware is not a mindset, or aware is not a verb. You know, there are two words that everybody thinks is a verb: awareness and mindset. I will aware my way out of this dark alley. I'll mindset the fuck out of Brian when he is mounted on me, punching me. They're not verbs. They're not verbs, man. You know, you're not going to aware or mindset shit.
Yeah, and where words matter, right, is, I think that's the part people have a tough time with. Do they matter in this context? Do they matter in that context? Man, they matter all the time. They matter all the time. But if you don't have a vocabulary to work with, then your words start to mean less.
I don't think you have to be the most loquacious Craig Douglas type person in the world, and this is where I think experience matters.
Scott's confused.
I don't know what loquacious
if
means.
you have spent time in a courtroom at all, whether it was a serious case or not, you will develop an extreme appreciation for precision in language. And if you don't have something that gives you that, which I don't think most people do, right? Most people aren't hanging out in courtrooms. I think that's why we don't see the same precision in language and instruction and pedagogy. I really think courtroom time is a huge way to force that into someone.
You're talking about your time there as a law enforcement officer?
Yeah, but it could be, maybe you're the bad guy,
Specifically courtroom time, because there are plenty of cops that don't spend time in court.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
Now, I mean, if you're presenting cases to a grand jury every quarter, if you're in suppression hearings, initial appearances, you know,
cross-exams,
depositions, things like that. All of a sudden, every word they're hanging on, they're looking at you. It's being recorded, so on and so forth. So, you know, even in law, I think,
and
law
not just what you're saying in the moment, what you said during the incident.
Yeah, I think police officers, if they're well trained and they're fit, and I think law enforcement professional experience, I think they do a pretty good job of teaching regular people for two reasons. Number one, police officers aren't fit as a population. They don't shoot well as a population. However, one thing they do routinely is, again, manage a wide swath of people, and they manage chaos while armed. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing I think most cops do, even if they're fat asses, is a lot of them, good, decent cops, it's hard to ruffle them. They've been to a lot of domestics. They've heard a lot of screaming kids, right? They've heard people pissed off at each other. So just that volatility with a regular person that has never experienced that, a well-adjusted regular person who's lived a good life, all of a sudden when he has a screaming person that's running towards him, we'll see that provoke a draw.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All the time. So he's running towards me. I said, yeah, because his kid just got hit in the street and he needs help. Right. And the misread, right, of that by regular people, because they don't have those lived experiences. I think law enforcement, because they do, and they manage chaos while armed really well. I think when it comes to teaching decision making, I think the law enforcement population probably does better than the military population when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's interesting
when it comes to that.
Well, which is interesting to think about, specific to like, again, who we're surrounded by, like at this conference, and who consumes a lot of this information, the market segments, if you will, and how they're consuming it. And there's a very large population, obviously, law enforcement officers and current or ex-military that look at it, and their reaction or emotion to it could be to what you guys are doing, and even what you're saying now, whatever, could be very, very different across the board. As compared to, again, the civilian, and bringing this back, like people looking at it and going, that's a little weird, man. Like, what are you guys doing? But it does come down to their ability to manage several things. Again, you guys, from a management perspective of the day, yourselves as a team, I would imagine if I saw you out on the street individually with your families, right? Or, at the beach, on Saturday, whatever, you'd be handling yourselves exactly the same way you're handling yourselves now, right? And that's refreshing to me. A lot of people ask, like, a few people are like, dude, are you going to that thing? I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm going to the thing. Like, how is it out there? I go, it's fucking amazing. Like, it's been an incredible thing. Hey, is that guy really the same guy like I see on the internet? Like, who is he? How is he in person? I'm like,
more swearing.
Yeah. So there may be a different filter. I mentioned that, like offline, there may be a little bit different filter. But my point being is yes, that is the same person. I don't know who you think that is, but to me, it is, because this is what I read and this is what I got. I don't know if that's helpful for you or if it's not helpful for you, but it is a little bit of a test that I think people are looking for, and it's really hard for people to, again, when they're trying to, like, what are all these big words these guys are using? Right. Is that a mask? Is that a mask to cover or wall off something that
are they authentic, or are they a personality? You
mentioned that the word authenticity in the altercation that you may be having, or the event that may be happening in front of you. I could talk to you guys for the next 4 hours, and I would pay to do it. So, but at the same time, like, I if I could, maybe ask a favor in kind of signing off here. And that would be this. If there's an opportunity for us to maybe do this again sometime, would you guys be willing to jump into another conversation and have this?
Definitely.
And if I could, I'll put this out there, and I don't know if I'm making too big a commitment or to the audience, and or maybe too big of an ask to you guys, but if I pose some questions, like, to the audience to maybe ask, would you guys be willing to maybe dive into a couple of those?
Yeah,
because
fun.
I do know I have pretty good pulse on the audience that does listen, because I try to communicate with them pretty regularly. It's much like the audience that have been around today. Yeah. This is an intelligent, smart crew. They know how to ask questions. And oftentimes I have conversations with people that have listened to the show, and they'll give me feedback, and they're like, man, you asked this question, it was awesome, but you know what? You missed this one, right? Like, or I wanted you to ask the next question, which would have been this. This is what I would have asked. And I'm like, you know what? This is the first time when it's really come up for me, where I'm like, there's so many things that came up in this conversation. I think it would be really cool to maybe go long format on it again at some point. I'm not asking for a commitment of time or whatever at this point, but that would be awesome for me.
We could absolutely do that. And on that note, we agree that, and I'm sure you find you find it the same. You said you did. Our patrons elevate us.
Yeah.
They really do. Yeah. They elevate us because they force us to ascend. They force ascendancy from us. They force us to be better. They force us to answer good questions like that.
Yeah, they demand it.
They do.
They demand it.
It's like, okay, well,
and that's why they're coming to see you guys.
Yeah. Well, there's two things though that probably does not come across in this interview or this podcast that we've done over the course of this, the time that we've been here, and that is that, it sounds daunting what we're talking about. And, everything's very serious and everything's very modulated and everything's like that. But
it's fascinating to me.
It is. Right? It is. But for somebody that maybe is just listening and hasn't seen it in action, it could be, maybe we might misrepresent ourselves to the point. To your point is, are they really like that? Is that how they really act in real life? And part of the thing that we do in the coursework is we get to know everybody. Mm-hmm. We know every single person that's in. By the end of the weekend, we all know everybody's name. The other thing that we do is that we take what we teach very seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously.
Oh, that's clear.
It's comedy.
I was hoping that was going to come out on the show, and it clearly
totally did. Comedy the entire time, and that's what keeps the levity. It keeps the vibe, keeps the morale up, because it's a grind. Yeah. It's a grind.
Yeah, but again, like, I would just say this: like, what a privilege you guys have. right?
Yeah.
What a privilege.
It is.
And how awesome is that?
We
You
do
know?
what we love for a living.
It's incredible. And you guys are friends, right? You get to hang out, but you're also professionals and you get to do that too. And
It's a lot of fun.
yeah, it's a business at the end of the day, and you get to do that and have fun and continue to develop it and, you know, do all the great stuff that comes along with it while also absorbing the liability that comes with it. And so that's the other part of it, is the responsibility that you guys demonstrate in the time that you spend with people, not just when you're down there, yesterday on the turf, but in every conversation I've watched you have. I've been standing on the sidelines listening to this stuff. I'm a nerd like that. I like to go study, you know, what people are doing and how they're interacting. And again, what's that awareness?
As long as you don't take notes on each person on your cell phone.
Yeah. So when we publish it or whatever. No, but my point of that is just like it's a different level, Creg, you know, you talking about, you know, being more collegiate in nature and in mindset and thinking about how you approach problems, but more specifically the communication of the material and how to connect with people. And I was hoping all of that was going to come out in this podcast. Like I said, I could do 4 more freaking hours with you guys, and we could pull so much more out of you. But I just, again, at risk of overdoing it, I just want to thank you guys. For your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for being such a big part of the summit, which was a huge driver for me. You know, coming here, like, look, these dudes are going to this thing. Like, because I already knew a little bit. Like, these guys are going to do these things. I know they're not just jumping in bed with some random thing. They could be on the road teaching a course right now. I know how these things work, right? I know how these conferences work. This is a volunteering of your time, you know, away from your families and things like that. And so the fact that you took time out today to sit down here, have this conversation, share it with other people, I thank you guys. Appreciate it. This was a ton of fun for me.
I like the nerdy conversations.
And
I enjoy them a lot.
And thank you for not asking, what's the best way to stab or shoot somebody in a clinch or a car?
In the taint.
Yeah. Because
Answer
seriously,
simple.
Greg knows.
these are the conversations we want to have. This is what we have internally, and I think you being able to ask us that stuff and being interested in it really kind of allows us to give everybody a peek behind the curtain.
Nerd out.
You know?
Well, I hope what it does is it some way inspires other people to want to have those conversations with you, and particularly like the end user, you know, that wants to know that when they're coming to this thing, they're not just learning how to stamp somebody in the taint. Right? That they're going to get way more out of it, because I sensed that. I read it. I picked a little bit of it up even before being here through the little bits that I could from other people. I mentioned that before to you guys off air. And again, the fact that you can articulate it just makes it so much better. And I think people will extract a ton of value from this. And I know I did. And so selfishly, thanks for that. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know we got another day here, and I'll try not to take up too much more of your time.
We're around, man.
I'll probably go back to the hotel tonight, not sleep. I'll be processing all of this stuff in my head. I'll be like, I got to ask him back about this thing again. So thanks again, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you. We appreciate you valuing what we did.
You got it, man.
Thank you.